Hi, welcome to a Roboflow training movie. In this training movie, I will show you how you can assign a JPEG to a thumbnail. And in this example, we're going to find that JPEG inside a zip file. So I have here a test folder, and in this test folder I have two zips. I have a zip in which I have just some files and not the thumbnail file I am looking for, and I have a second example of the zip where it does have a thumbnail.jpg in there, which represents the JPEG that needs to be assigned. So if I now catalog these two files into my catalog, I go to my test folder and I pick up these two files. It's just going to catalog them. Make sure your asset handling set has the zip asset store disabled, because otherwise it will separate all the individual records. So I have two records in here, one good one and one bad one. I want to pick up from inside the zip a thumbnail to assign to this particular record. So how is this going to work? Let me first show you what has happened already behind the scenes. That is that it has in the Cumulus catalog I defined a trigger here. I set up a Roboflow trigger that is automatically, whenever a new record is created, sends a trigger file to a folder, and that's this folder. I created two records, so there are two XML files. This is going to be identified, triggered by the workflow, and the workflow will find the records and process them. This folder is no longer useful. The files are in Cumulus, but these are the two folders to watch. Here the trigger files are going to disappear while it is processing them, and on the other side he's going to use Roboflow is going to use a temp folder in which it's going to pick up the zip. It's copying the zip to this folder because your zip might be in the vault, and then it cannot just unzip a file from the vault. So it just puts it in a temporary location. That step could be removed from the workflow if the zip is not in the vault but in a path that Roboflow can reach. And then it's going to call an external zip or unzip tool to pick up that specific file that I'm looking for. Because unzipping is not a standard functionality of Cumulus, nor is it from Roboflow. I'm just using 7-zip, but you could use any unzip tool. So let's go to the workflow. I will explain the workflow in detail, but first let's see what it actually does. So if I start the workflow and I quickly go back to the folders here, you see, well, it goes so fast. It has, because it's small zips, could be a little bit longer with bigger zips, but it has processed these files and it has used this temporary zip environment, but it's already empty again because the workflow cleans up after it's finished. But if we now look at the result, we can see that the file that did have that thumbnail file in it has now a thumbnail. Let's have a look at the workflow. So in the result of the workflow, if I do show log, it will say that if the zip it found two records. Why did it find two records? Because there were two trigger files there. And then it says the result is successful. And then for the second one, where there was no valid file inside, it says it's not successful. It will also, if you want that, mail you this report. It will say, okay, I processed these 10 zip files and they were successful or not successful. So it gives you the opportunity to act if they were not successful. Good. let's have a look at how this is accomplished in the workflow. So it's a hot collection workflow, which means that the starting point are records. It finds these records either by a query or by a trigger file. Here I'm actually combining both. It's doing the trigger file, but on top of that, it's doing a narrow search on the triggers to only pick up those files where the record name has an extension of .zip. Imagine that you're cataloging also other files. It doesn't need to do this whole procedure of this workflow on files that are not zip files. And so that's why the extra step. If you don't use the trigger folder and leave this empty, then it's just going to perform the query. But that means in this example, it would find all zip files over and over again in each time you run this workflow. So that's also not what we're looking for, but could be useful in other cases. Maybe your trigger could be a status field and say, okay, yes, this is a field you need to evaluate. And then at the end of the workflow, you set that status field to something else, and then it would only process it once. Here I set up my notification and my email configuration to notify a person about the result. I give the title. The body of the mail is the name of the zip file and the result of the unzip. These are two internal variables that I'm creating during my workflow and that I'm putting in the body of my mail for each record. And then this is the real body of my mail with some text saying hello, blah, 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 whatever. It's basic HTML with a special tag inside. I'm not going to explain here the whole functionality of how tags work in Roboflow. That's for another workflow. Tag just picks up a variable that is in memory. And this email message is this part that is then in memory. So that's what it picks up. Then this is the folder that I showed you. For purpose of debugging or other reasons, I just store the result in another folder of the XML that has been processed, but that's not mandatory. Then I added a parameter which allows me to put up a regular expression validating the name of the file that it has picked up from the zip. Depending on your zip tool, maybe you can extract, maybe you can't extract exactly the file you want, but maybe you have to extract everything. Then this additional thing will give you the opportunity to describe a regular expression, and this will do a Java matches instruction which requires regular expression, and that way it can pick up some file name. So it could be that it's not a fixed file name, but it is any file called like this, or thumbnail, or starts with thumbnail, or whatever you need it to be. I'm using a temporary folder. I use an asset handling set because I'm picking up a file from Cumulus, so it requires an asset handling set. And then finally, I have an unzip command. My unzip command that I'm going to be using in my script is actually calling 7-zip, as I said. It could be whatever you want to use as a zip tool. And in Roboflow, the elements of a call to such a tool are separated by #tab hash. That's to avoid the complication of having to double quote elements or anything, and so Java takes care of that for you. So Roboflow uses that technology to be able to send an instruction to that tool with the specific parameters. So for 7-zip, this is the E for extraction. Then again, the tag instruction is picking up an internal variable. It's prefixed with a $sign here because we don't want it to be executed in this script, in this parameter script. We're telling if we were to put here a #, it would evaluate it immediately, which makes no sense because this path to the zip doesn't exist yet because the script isn't running. The workflow isn't running, so it doesn't have records. So that's why it's a $sign, and so it says path of zip, which is a variable I create in the script. And then the next parameter is -o, is where do you want to export it to, where do you want to unzip it to. That's that other variable internally. and then the parameter is what is your file or files you want to export. In this case, this is thumbnail.jpg, but it could also be with a wildcard star.jpg or thumbnail star.jpg or whatever naming convention you come up with. It just needs to match, of course, with whatever you're going to do with your evaluation afterwards. But of course, this is telling the unzipper to only extract that particular file. That's to avoid having a 2 GB zip being unzipped to 4 GB of files. If it just needs this one file, then this will go quite fast. The -R means recursively for 7-zip. So it goes inside subfolders inside the zip. Good. So these are the parameters it uses in the script. So if we now have a quick look of how the script works. Well, first of all, I'm storing the temporary folder, so I'm creating it if it doesn't exist. This is just storing, enabling or disabling debug. And then I'm setting the default result of the unzip, which is not successful. If it's successful, it will be set to a successful value further down in the script. Then I'm copying the asset of the record to the temp folder. As I said, you could just pick up the path to the file if it's not in the vault, but in this case it might be in the vault, so, or it might be in a location that Roboflow doesn't have access to. So this way you're making a copy of that file into your local folder, into your temp folder. Then I'm storing the name of that zip because I will be using that in my mail, which becomes name of zip, which you saw as being used with a tag instruction in the mail itself. And then I'm storing the path of the zip because I'm using that variable to get to the specific file. And then, sorry, to use in the zip instruction, in the unzip instruction, I'm storing, creating a target temporary folder with a date timestamp, so something very unique, to have output, to have the unzipped file put somewhere. And I'm storing the path of that just created folder as a text to be able to use it again in that zip instruction or unzip instruction. Then I'm picking up that zip instruction from the global parameters and storing it here in my script. Why? This instruction will automatically evaluate all these placeholders that we were using in it, and so that's why at that point it translates this path of zip to the real value, the path of unzip to the real value, getting the final instruction. I'm writing that to the log file if you have debug enabled, and then I'm executing the external command, the unzip, writing the result to the log if debug is enabled, and then as a result I will have a folder with files in it. Hopefully only one file, which is the easiest, but whatever your zip tool can do. And then I'm storing the file name because now I'm storing the file name of that particular list of files that I have. And I'm now searching for that particular thumbnail file. How do I search? Well, I pick up the name of that thumbnail and then I do an evaluation, a text condition test, doing the regular expression that we had defined in the parameter file, evaluating the name of the thumbnail against that. So as a result, if that is true, it goes in here and it writes to the log in debug mode saying, hey, I found my thumbnail file. Then it will automatically store the path of that file. Why? Because now we need the path of that file to set the record value. And so our record, we want to set the thumbnail field, which is just a field in your record, to the path of that thumbnail. Automatically Roboflow detects behind the scenes, okay, this is a binary field, an image field, and you're giving me a path, so I'm picking up that file, assuming it's a JPEG or a PNG, and importing that as a thumbnail, as a byte stream to the thumbnail field, which becomes then the thumbnail. and I'm setting my result as now it's successful. I found the file and I exit my loop. I do this for every file I find until I find the file. If I don't find the file, the result will still be not successful. When I'm finished with that, I'm writing whatever the result is into my log so that my log can show me what happened, and then I'm deleting anything that is in my temp folder and cleaning up after the process. So that's how this workflow works. It's very straightforward, and it uses an external tool to pick up the particular zip file from the file. There's many variations to this workflow that could happen, but this is just an example of how this can work for you. Thank you for joining this training movie, and hope to see you in the next one.